The owner asked me to rebed this hatch lens. You can see it's been siliconed to death around the edge here. External sealing like this never really works. Might work temporarily, but it never is a lasting fix. So I don't know how this is going to go. I've never replaced a lens in one of these before, so this should be interesting. Looks like some adhesive-y stuff on these crossbars. I think if I can get it started, it'll probably be okay. I'd like to get it out and without breaking it. Although if it does break, it's not the end of the world to replace the lens. Certainly rather not if I can avoid it. Anyway, we'll see how this goes. Should be a little interesting. So without much difficulty, I was able to get this lens out of the hatch frame. I peeled this old sealant here. I just peeled it out of the groove outside of the plexiglass. And then I carefully pried it up around the edges with this 5-in-1 tool. One of my favorite tools. Pried it up all the way around the 4 edges, and then from underneath I worked on these 2 center bars and loosened the sealant there. And then I was able to easily remove that lens in one intact piece. I'm going to try to reuse that. We'll see if it's worthwhile or not. It's in pretty good shape considering, but I don't know if I can get all that stuff off or not. It's some kind of it's like an adhesive foam tape that's on here. As you can see, I've been scraping a little of it off here. So there's that, I guess, to cushion the thing. And I assume it's adhesive on both sides. And then it was sealed, batted around the edges. Not well. That's why I'm doing this. Gobs of old silicone. I quickly decided it wasn't worth my effort to save this piece, even though it's intact. But to scrape this junk off, and then what do I have? A 40-year-old cracked, and not cracked, but faded and hazed over piece of plexiglass. I can buy a new piece for $37, and that's what we're going to do. This is 19.5 by 19.5, the lens size. It's 1/8 inch thick. And I'll buy a new piece and shape it accordingly. And that way I can spend all the time, and it's going to take a bit of time to clean up this groove around the edge, which is not full of, but has a lot of silicone in it. Miserable stuff. So I've got to clean that up fairly substantially so that the new sealant has a chance. And that's where my effort should be spent on this particular hatch. Not on cleaning up that mess. So, new plexiglass on the way. I received a new piece of acrylic to replace this old lens. It's the old one. And I used the old one to shape the new one. It's the same size, and I trimmed the corners accordingly. So that's been cut. I peeled the paper off a little piece of scrap to show the color of the new lens. It's a good match to the old, maybe a little darker. But it's certainly less faded than this old one. And it's basically the same color. The old one was probably this color when it started. So I cut that to fit, and it does fit. I'll show you that in a minute. And I've cleaned up to the most practicable point possible all the old silicone from this hatch frame. Out of this little caulking groove. Scraped off all the flat fang surfaces. And then off the edge, this outer edge here. This is pretty clean at the moment, especially where the hatch is going to bond. I'll show you when I put the new lens in a second. There's actually a space around it that's designed for sealant. So now I have the new lens set in place, and it fits well, and it does leave this groove around the edge to be filled with sealant, just like in the old. The old hatch was basically bonded with this junky tape underneath. There's no sealant on any of this. This is some sort of adhesive foam tape, and that seemed to be the extent of how this lens was actually installed in the frame. I'm not going to use that. It obviously didn't work. Instead, I'm going to use the proper sealant on all fang surfaces, including the crossbars. And this will secure the lens extremely well as bed it and seal it. And then there will be this additional bead that's partly cosmetic in nature around the edge. I'll use black sealant because I think that would look best in this case. And I'll cover all of this, fill these grooves. So it'll make a mess when I install it, but it's going to bond this thing for real and seal it, so it's not going to leak again. It's the whole point of the exercise. I'm not impressed with how that was installed, and I don't think it lasted long without leaking. From the amount of silicone repairs on the outside, I'm sure it leaked for many years. Anyway, this is the next step. A little more cleaning on that hatch frame. And when my sealant gets here, I can bed this in place and call this project done. To bond and seal this new lens to the hatch frame, I need to remove the paper from the bonding areas on the bottom side where it's going to rest against the hatch frame and the two cross members. And I only want to remove the paper from those areas because that'll make it easier to clean up. So I want to leave the protective paper on until the installation's done. So in order to register this in a duplicate, like I'm not going to flub that word, in a way that I can duplicate, I wanted a simple solution. I don't know if this is going to work out, but this is what I've come up with. I just taped some stir sticks that I have tightly to each side of the hatch, which holds it in its position. The edge of this hatch frame is just barely higher than the plastic, so that gives these something to push against. So this can't move in any direction right now. And I think that'll be enough for me to flip it over, trim the paper around the various structural members to which this will be bonded. And then when I install it for real, I'll be able to be relatively assured that it's in the proper position. So this is what I've come up with. Couldn't glue anything to this paper. I didn't really have a better idea. This was what I came up with that seems to work. So this is what I'm going to go with, for now at least. And we'll see how it works. I don't like complicated jigs and stuff. There's probably all kinds of ways I could do this if I wanted to spend half the day on it, but I don't. I want to spend about half a minute. So let's see how this goes. Here I flipped this upside down, and now my task will be to run a knife along all of these edges, after which I can trim the paper, and that'll leave a clear area of the plastic available for bonding. You can see here these score marks. This is where I ran the knife right along the aluminum frame. And then I've started pulling up this paper. It comes right up. The paper has a sort of a stretchy stuff on one side. And it's okay if this isn't perfect, but this way the bonding area is exposed. And that little place right there where it gets wider is this That little section there, that part of the casting where the screws for the hold up, whatever they're called, the clamps that hold this in an open position. Words are failing me today. After removing all that paper, here's what we have. A more or less exact replica of the bonding surface of that frame. So all that's left now is to goop it up and install it. So here the lens is bonded in place. Got it clamped tightly so that it squeezes out everywhere. And I haven't worried about trying to fill or tool this gap. This is a cosmetic seam around the edge. So once this is cured overnight or so, I'll come back and I will put some more sealant in there and trowel out a nice cosmetic seam. The bonding is all happening underneath and sealing. This seam won't really even be part of the seal, although it'll help. Probably dig a little of that out. That's a little full in that corner, but otherwise there's space above where the sealant is squeezed out. And I can't show you the bottom. The camera won't go down there to see underneath. I've peeked underneath. It's nice and squeezed out everywhere. Got it weighted on the two crossbars. Clamped as needed to make sure that it stays stuck. I pushed it down by hand first. This is what I used. So we'll give this a cure overnight, unclamp it, and clean up the excess on the bottom. So with that groove all ready to go and cleaned up, I masked around the outer edge of the frame just to help with cleanup. And then I filled the gap with more of this black sealant. As you can see, it's overfilled. Next step will be to tool it out so that it's a nice bead all the way around. After tooling that joint and removing the tape around the edge, here's where we are. I'm going to leave the paper in till the stuff cures a little because I don't want to mess it up, but I was careful to tool it so that I basically scraped the paper clean right at the edge of that groove. So it shouldn't disturb the sealant at all when I pull the paper. Very tempting to pull it now, but to get it started on one of these corners is just going to be hard. It'll come off later. This tape here is because the paper got a little beat up on that edge, so I put the tape over it to protect the plastic lens. Anyway, that's done. So we'll let that cure, pull the paper, put it back on the boat. Well, maybe predictably, but after a few hours extra time letting this sealant cure, I decided to try my hand at pulling the paper. And I did. Went fine, no problems. I was very careful around the edges. But I thought it'd be easier to pull up before the sealant fully cured, plus I was really anxious to see this. So here we are. Not going to touch it till after the weekend. Give this plenty of time to set up. But this is done, ready to go back on the boat. Looks great. You can see through the plastic, you can see the sealant on all of these structural members is completely consistent. There's no, you'd see it if there was a gap. And it's generally 100% coverage, especially around the outer edges, which is where it's most important. It's where the real seal happens. It's under that edge. I'm talking about this part, not the edge seal. So I'm happy with what I see here. I had completely consistent squeeze out underneath, so I'm not surprised, but this is what I was going for, a nice even coat for adhesion and sealing. So this is done.